All right. Well, welcome everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are connecting from, and welcome to this session, Navigating the Landscape of LDS Challenges. My name is Christina Galan, and I belong to the RedMat team, and I will be moderating this session. So I will do a couple of housekeeping rules, and then we will move on to our two panelists for today. So to start, this session will be recorded and we will be sending it to you in a couple of days, maybe next week, the beginning or so. Also, you have a chat section, so please use that chat to introduce yourselves, let us know where you're from, what you're interested in LDS technologies, and other things that you might want to add. You also have a Q&A section. That Q&A section box is specifically for questions for our panelists. We will have a pretty extended Q&A session. We do have a couple of questions pre-submitted, but we do encourage you to use that box if any questions that you might have for our panelists are welcome, and we will go through them during this session. Also, for the folks joining on YouTube, you have a chat for both options. Also, let us know a little bit about you and the questions. You can also post them, and our technical team will send it to us. Right, so to know a little bit about the structure of this session, it will be around 45 minutes to an hour. We will first introduce our two panelists, get to know a little bit their background, what are they working on, and their connection to LDS. And then we will move, as I said, to the Q&A section. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing so we can see everyone better, much better. So perfect. So Gabe and Prantik, welcome to today's session. Thank you so much for being here today. Let's start with Gabe Morto from the LDS Council. Gabe, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the LDS Council and what are you seeing in the industry right now?
Yeah, absolutely, Christina. And thank you so much for having me today. This is a real pleasure to be here and excited to hear the conversations and see some of the questions from the audience members. My name is Gabe Murtaugh, and I am the Director of Markets and Technology at the Long Duration Energy Storage, or LDES Council. And we are a group that's made up of about 70 members, and most of those members are technology companies. So they're the companies that are actually developing the long duration energy storage technologies and having those deployed out on grids someplace. We also have some other members, we call them anchor members, that are usually larger companies, bigger household name companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Rio Tinto, folks who have goals for decarbonizing either their entire operation or certain aspects of their operation. Obviously, with technology companies, they're working to decarbonize typically, AI centers, data centers that they're developing. And to do that, they understand that a lot of what it takes is going to be renewable energy, generating the megawatt hours, the energy that's going to be consumed by those data centers, and then using storage resources to move the energy from the time that it's being produced to the time that it's being consumed, which I know is a lot of what we're going to get into during this panel. There have been a lot of really big movements, and I know RedMat is a global organization on long-duration energy storage around the world, and we are seeing some really fantastic advances here in the US, but also in Canada, in the UK, in Italy, in Spain, in Chile, in China. So there's great strides being made around the world. We're seeing big numbers in terms of deployment, and I think that's going to continue on into the future as people continue to decarbonize.
All right, well, thank you so much, Gabe, for that introduction. We also have Prantik with us today. Hi, Prantik.
Hi, everyone. I'm Prantik. I'm from Black and Beach. And at Black and Beach, I work as a subject matter expert on energy storage, low carbon hydrogen, and carbon capture projects. I come from an R&D background in electrochemical technologies. And so at Black and Beach, we have been working on a lot of LDES projects recently, I'd say in the last 2 years. And I think many of the questions that we are going to be discussing today will touch upon all those issues that we are facing developing LDES projects. So in this webinar, my answers will come from, say, more technology perspective and also the project developers perspective. That's what I do at Black and Beach. So yeah, excited for the webinar.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining today. And without further ado, let's start then with the questions. So one of the biggest questions that I think I've been asking in all my LDS webinars, but I think it's important is how many hours are we talking about when we talk about LDS technologies? Because I know that there's not one idea, there's different ideas. So how long do you understand LDS technologies go through? Whoever wants to start.
I'm happy to start. So you're right. This is a interesting question and can be a thorny question depending on who you talk to and frankly, when you talk to them, because this is a bit of an evolving conversation. And I think a lot of the answers are driven by, policies that are coming out and being implemented. The Department of Energy here in the United States has a definition for long duration energy storage to be 10 plus hours. At the Long Duration Energy Storage Council, we define long duration energy storage as 8 plus hours. And that's largely an artifact of the requirements that we're seeing in some markets globally. For example, California has targets to develop 8 plus hour duration storage. There's other targets in other countries around the world that are also focusing on 8 plus hours of duration. So that's the definition that we're sticking to right now, and it seems to fit with at least a majority of those policies that are out there.
Okay, perfect. Pratik, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I agree with what Gabe said, and what I would add to what his answer is that I don't think from the project development perspective, it really matters. What matters is what is the use case for LDES technology. So we have seen utilities coming to us, and they said that, look, if we want to decarbonize our grid, right, then we have this X megawatt or say X gigawatt of lithium-ion batteries in our disposal that will provide, say, a lot of the electricity demand in, say, the next 3 to 4 hours after the sun sets, right? And we want the LDES to kick in after the lithium-ion battery discharges, right? So they are looking at, say, 10 hours of duration for Y gigawatt capacity. So that's up to them, that 10 gigawatt, right? 10 hours. That's their choice. We have also seen utilities, particularly in the Midwest. In the Midwest, the wind has a lot of variability. Like the variability is in the order of days. So they're looking for something that preferably discharging in like days duration. So their demand is a little bit different. So it really depends on what the utilities want. What I would say probably just 8 plus hours is probably a starting point to go with. But from the project developer's perspective, what matters is the strategy of the deployer who is deploying the LDES.
Thank you. All right, another question that I've been hearing a lot is the comparison with lithium-ion storage. And what exactly are there differences, similarities? How can you explain a little bit where they are at? Gabe, would you like to add something?
Sure, yeah. So lithium-ion technology is obviously deployed at grid scale widely around the world. I think the California markets have about 9,000 megawatts of lithium-ion storage, and they have a system that peaks at around 50 gigawatts. So you can already start to think, gee, this is a pretty big percentage of makeup of the portfolio of the grid. Long story short, I think, and that's front of the meter, and then they've got more lithium ion behind the meter. So those are some pretty big numbers. There's other grids around the world that are also developing and building lithium ion solutions, and exactly like you're saying, Christina, those solutions tend to be for shorter duration. We've done some analysis, and we've got a paper on our website, the Long Duration Energy Storage Council.com, in our research section, that outlines roughly what costs look like for lithium-ion projects versus some of the other long-duration energy storage technology projects. And a little bit of a spoiler alert, we are working on our annual report for 2024, which should be out in just a couple months, and that's going to have even more details on benchmarking and information on how we price long duration technology. Obviously, like I said, there's a lot of technologies that are out there, but generally what we see is, at the 4-hour mark, if you're thinking about purchasing any kind of storage capacity that can do 4 hours of duration, you're usually looking at resources that are least cost, that are going to be in the lithium ion family. Once you start looking at 8-hour duration, usually the alternative technologies that can provide long duration energy storage, which we also include lithium ion in that group, are pretty competitive with lithium ion prices. Generally, lithium ion prices are fairly linear as you increase the duration of the resource. For long duration resources, those costs tend to be a little bit flatter. So once you get into the 10-hour range, the 15-hour range, the 20-hour range, there's definitely other technologies that become much more cost effective than your typical lithium ion, which you do see a lot of deployment today. As far as deployment numbers for other long duration energy storage technologies, we do include pumped hydro in those numbers. Pumped hydro has obviously been around for a very long time, and there's a lot of pumped hydro capacity that's been developed already. But within the last few years, alternatives to pumped hydro, you haven't seen a ton of deployment, although there has been some. But we expect those numbers to really start to balloon in the next 5 to 10 years as, and I know we're getting into this, but as we see grids decarbonize more and have those needs for longer duration capacities for storage.
Okay, thank you. Prantik, would you like to add something?
Yeah, Gabe touched upon the economics of it and the deployment from the deployment perspective of it. So let me add a little bit from the technology perspective of it. So the first difference is that lithium ion is a family of chemistries, but all of them electrochemical technologies. And as like most of the electrochemical technologies, their round trip efficiency is usually very high in general, like close to, say, the DC to DC round trip efficiency is around 90% or so. When it comes to LDES, we have a bunch of different technologies, right? So we have mechanical storage technologies, we have electrochemical technologies, we have thermal technologies, we have chemical technologies, or sometimes thermochemical technologies. So that all the technologies are very, very different, and their construction, the strategy around them, the geological features where one thing becomes important, the other things doesn't. They're very important. So what I will say is that from a project development perspective, if a company, or say a commercial entity like Microsoft, or say a utility, if they want to deploy lithium-ion batteries, the strategy mostly boils down to what the use case and choosing the right vendor. When it comes to LDES, it is really more complex, because then first you have to choose the right technology for yourself. Like, are you going mechanical or are you going electrochemical, right? So that's one thing. What another important feature of the long duration energy storage systems is their response time, and it is very, very important from technology perspective. Lithium-ion battery has a very high response time, not as high as, say, supercapacitors or flywheels, but what it means is that if you integrate with renewables, and if the renewable is highly intermittent, and if the power from the renewable is ramping up and down, lithium-ion battery follows that thing very quickly. So it integrates well with the renewables. For long-duration energy storage, some does to some extent, but some technologies follow the varying power to some extent, but some don't. So that is something that response time is to be very is to be kept in mind while integrating with the renewables. So that's another aspect while developing the project. Another important differentiation between most of the LDES technologies from lithium-ion technologies is the degradation. Lithium-ion battery degrades pretty fast. Depending on the usage cases, we have seen like 1 to 3% degradation per year in energy capacity. Long duration energy storage degrades much slower. And so, for example, if you're a technology manufacturer and if you're LDES, you're providing an LDES technology, and if it degrades like lithium-ion batteries, you're probably not going to be in the market because you want much lower degradation than lithium-ion batteries for augmentation and all those other areas. So a lot of differences, but I do agree with Gabe that you'll see that 8 hours, 6 to 8 hours is the mark where you'll see that most long duration energy technologies, not all, most long duration energy technologies will give you a levelized cost of energy that is lower than lithium ion batteries, and that's the business case for non-lithium ion batteries. So yeah, I guess I'll stop here.
That's fine. You can continue. Actually, there's a question that I think you've also answered from Ken, one of the attendees, which is a higher cost of lithium ion for longer durations due to the cost of augmentation? Well, that wasn't responded, but he also asked, what drives lithium ion higher cost for long duration, and what makes other LDES technologies more cost effective at 8-10 hour durations? Would you like to answer, Prantik?
Yeah, sure. I can go first this time. So this can be answered from multiple angles. So if you think about, let's first think about CapEx. So the total capital expenditure that you need to deploy like a plant, right? And if you think about, say, now here we're talking about scales, and this becomes important, right? For example, we have 100 megawatt, 200 megawatt lithium-ion battery plants. And in fact, actually, we have even bigger. Then recently in California, they have deployed something which is much bigger. We don't have an LDES plant that is like of that scale. And CapEx is very sensitive to scale. So if you take, say for example, a 10 megawatt lithium-ion plant versus a 10 megawatt LDES plant, right? We have seen that some technologies, the electrochemical LDES technologies, are similar in terms of CapEx. However, some thermal technologies lost the battle in terms of CapEx. However, they have a different use case, and that's why they're deployed, let's not go into that. So that's in terms of CapEx. So I would say if you compare the similar scale, you will see most of them are similar to lithium-ion storage projects. Some of them are higher. The thermal ones are higher. The mechanical ones usually are lower, but the mechanical ones have a larger scale. So like 100 megawatt or like even more than that. Think about pumped hydro or compressed air. That's one from the CapEx. From the levelized cost, it becomes a little bit difficult to talk about the levelized cost. But if you think about like a very standard cycling scenario, then we see that like from 6 to 8 hour duration, most long duration energy storage systems will provide a levelized cost of energy, which is lower than that lithium ion do. If you look at if you plot the levelized cost of energy versus hours of storage, you'll see that lithium ion can flattens out. So if you increase the storage duration, lithium ion's levelized cost of energy will be similar. For 6 hours, for 8 hours, for 12 hours, it doesn't decrease. For long duration energy storage, one generic feature is that they usually go down with longer and longer duration of storage. So that's one. The last point, what I mentioned, is actually the material availability. We have seen that most of the long duration energy storage, the materials that are used in long duration energy storage technologies are significantly materials that are available almost everywhere on the earth, right? Whereas lithium-ion technologies have this lithium, that is not available everywhere. And in some chemistries, for example, if you go to the lithium cobalt oxide or lithium cobalt manganese oxide, you also have cobalt, which is also not available outside. So LDES have this, I'd say it's like less material constraint than lithium ion, but it's not true for everything, right? For example, if you have a vanadium flow battery, vanadium is also something that is not found everywhere. So, but in most cases, I would say that material supply issue with LDES technologies is less than lithium-ion generated. With that, I'll stop.
So Prantik, I think that's a really nice description. Maybe just for an even higher level, more simplistic response, if you're thinking about building, a 100 megawatt, 4-hour duration lithium ion resource, you're going to need a certain amount of cells. You're going to need a certain amount of racks to hold those cells. And if you're going to turn that from a 4-hour duration battery to an 8-hour duration battery, you're roughly going to need double all those materials. And I think, like you were saying, those materials are expensive. So you're roughly going to double your cost, more or less. For long duration resources, and just to pull another example, I think some of the ones that you already talked about were great. Like a flow battery. What a flow battery does is it basically has two tanks of liquid electrolyte, essentially, so Gatorade. And one of the tanks is charged and the other tank is not charged. And you're moving this aqueous solution from one tank to another and either picking electrons off of it and discharging your battery, or putting electrons onto it and recharging the resource. In that case, the material that you're talking about is, effectively Gatorade. So if you're talking about doubling your duration of a 4-hour flow battery, you're basically talking about doubling the size of the tank and doubling the amount of, aqueous solution you have, which is relatively inexpensive, which is why they can size up so easily. And I think there's a lot of other long duration technologies that have similar properties where that inexpensive material that you're actually using to build the resources is fairly low cost. I know there was one part of the question that had to deal with cell augmentation. I don't think that's a huge part of this story. I think we are talking about, raw installation costs right now. But cell augmentation is something that you have to think about with lithium-ion resources. And I know that Lazard is working on their updated information on their levelized cost of storage that they do regularly, periodically. I'm not sure if it's every year or every other year or something. But those new numbers that are coming out are actually going to have increased values for cell augmentation and general operations costs. Because what they are seeing is from actual operational data for lithium-ion resources, cell augmentation is coming up more or sooner than they thought it was. And I think some of like the air conditioning loads, auxiliary loads that are associated with operating lithium-ion resources also tend to be a little bit more expensive than was originally anticipated. So do be on the lookout for that study, which I know is forthcoming very soon. Now, one of the other things that I know we've already touched on a couple of times is levelized cost of energy or levelized cost of storage. And I want to be, just for this audience, I want to make sure that you guys are aware what those words mean. Levelized cost of storage was a measure that was developed to anticipate what recovery rates would have to be for essentially lithium-ion, 4-hour duration or less resources. And what this measure does is it says, okay, here's how much it's going to cost to install the resource. Here's how much it's going to cost for operations and maintenance. And here's my anticipated usage for that resource over a prescribed period of time, like the lifetime of the resource. So we're going to annualize all those costs. And then that number that I'm thinking about, which is expressed usually in dollars per megawatt hour, it's saying how much money do I need to make in the energy markets when I'm selling energy to be able to recover that cost to build the resource and maintain the resource. And for 4-hour batteries, and certainly for 2-hour batteries or 1-hour batteries, you can think about a use case of, well, I'm going to charge my batteries during the lowest cost hours of the day. So you've got to figure in what the cost of that electricity is. And I'm going to discharge during the highest price hours of the day. And you can generally assume that, a full cycle where you're fully discharging and fully charging is probably a reasonable assumption for these, 4-hour duration resources. Once you start talking about 8-hour duration resources, I think those assumptions become a little bit looser. You may not be cycling, fully discharging and fully recharging an 8-hour battery because the margins may not be there between the lowest 8-hour 8-hour prices of the day and the highest 8-hour prices of the day. So you may only be doing, charging for 8 hours one day and discharging for 6, and then the next day you may be, charging for 4 hours and then discharging for 8 hours, something like that. So your actual operations, and certainly once you get into 20 hours or 50 hours or 100-hour resource, you're not going to be, discharging down to 0 and then charging up to 100, even on a daily basis. You may only cycle a couple of times a year. Although we do show that most long duration storage resources, including those that are 100+ hours, will be doing daily energy arbitrage alongside of the shorter duration lithium ion resources. So you will be charging up during those very, very low price hours of the day and discharging during the very, very high price hours of the day. But the thing is, you certainly won't be like split 12 and 12 or anything like that. The price spreads won't be there to maintain that. So this notion of levelized cost of energy or levelized cost of storage becomes more and more distorted as you get up to higher durations of resources. So I think the way to think about costs, and a big part of this discussion is about decarbonization, is, gee, if I want to decarbonize my system, I'm going to start to develop a glide path of, hey, I need this many solar resources, this many wind resources, this much offshore wind resources. I need some amount of 4-hour duration storage resources. I need some amount of 10+ hour duration and some amount of maybe 100+ hour duration resources. And then I need to start to think about, well, if I want to buy 10+ hour duration resources, what's the lowest, the least expensive way I can do that? Should I be buying lithium ion or should I be buying another technology? Well, I think what we're saying is probably if you know you need that 10+ hour duration storage to decarbonize, which studies show you will, likely today, economics are going to be pointing you towards a solution that's an alternative to lithium ion. So very long answer for a short question.
No, but thank you so much for that answer and that explanation, because I didn't know where LCOS came from. So it's good to know the origin. So definitely, I think it's important also to take into account decarbonization and where we're at and why we need it. So thank you for that explanation. So next question, that we have a couple of questions already coming in, but I'd like to just talk a little bit about where we see long duration energy storage is at today. Every time I do a little bit more research, I see more traction about it, more people engaged, which I think it's a very positive finding. But I know that you're already talking, that you're already doing some projects, or we're already working on it. So it's something that's happening. It's not something that distant as it seems. So can you tell us a little bit about the existing projects, the lessons that that you're learning, and how you're seeing it? And also, Gabe, I think it's really interesting to see what's happening worldwide, because I know that there's other regions such as maybe UK or China that are also starting to develop these projects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So obviously, taking a step back and thinking about this globally through organizations like COP, which have, information tracked through the International Energy Agency, the IEA, there is a goal to decarbonize by 2040 to maintain climate change and keep temperature increases globally to 1.5 degrees Celsius or less. There's been a lot of work, and actually Bloomberg just did some really excellent work to kind of paint the picture of where we are in terms of those goals. If you think about development of storage resources and new generation and expanding grid capabilities, developing more distribution networks, developing more transmission lines, more interconnections, all kinds of things like that. When you look at a span of 16 years, which is between 2024 and 2040, suddenly those timelines look very, very compressed. And I think some of the work that Bloomberg did is just kind of maybe to oversimplify what they did, maybe just a little bit of a color coding, like a stoplight color coding of, where we are in terms of the goals that we have to get to decarbonization, global decarbonization by 2040, and where we are today. I think, what they said about technologies like wind and solar is we're probably about 2 to 3 times the amount of capacity that we currently have behind where we need to be. For storage resources, they said the numbers are more like 6 to 10 times behind where we need to be. And that's probably taking into consideration that there's been a fairly robust build out of lithium ion resources. But I think a big caveat is, if we're that far behind considering all storage, we're really far behind considering long duration energy storage resources. If you talk about some of the technologies that need, you're talking about storing energy potentially underground. Those take a long time to site and permit and interconnect, and to get like inspections and things like that done. And construction times can be long. And then similar comments with pumped hydro. Those can take an enormous amount of time to site and permit and get approved. So, a 16-year runway to get all this done is looking like a very tall order at this point. Now, all hope isn't lost. I think we've made a tremendous amount of progress in terms of deployed storage. We are seeing deployments of long duration energy storage. Most of the deployments are either directly funded by federal governments or state governments, or they're projects that are location or use specific. So I've got a community that's currently relying on diesel backup generators, and I don't want to run the diesels anymore. I want to get something that's going to be a little bit more sustainable and cleaner. You can replace those diesel generators. Diesel is expensive, by the way, with long duration energy storage resources, and it can keep your community's lights on for 100 hours if you're in California during like a public safety power shutoff or something like that. So there are use cases, there are applications, there are projects that are being done. Most of these projects are on the smaller side. Most of the technology readiness levels, the TRLs for some of these long duration energy storage companies, are in the earlier stages. But I think as we start to see targets like the targets that are set in California, like some of the goals that we're seeing in the UK, like some of the goals we're seeing in Canada and Australia, that's going to start to spur much bigger contracts for long duration energy storage. So you're going to start to see contracts being struck for 50 megawatts, 100 megawatts, 200 megawatts, et cetera. And that's going to drive development of these long duration storage technologies. It's going to, it's going to move costs down the cost curve as these technologies start to scale. It's going to push up the technology readiness level for some of these long duration energy storage companies, which is only going to mean that in other cases, these technologies are going to be more economic. Other regions, countries, states, whatever, who are looking to decarbonize are going to say, oh yeah, these technologies and these solutions do make sense now because of the economics, because they are working at scale in these other grids. So I think we're just almost at the tipping point right now where we start to see that traction and things really take hold and start to take off, much like we saw with lithium ion technologies just a few years ago, and like we saw with PV technologies maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Perfect. Thanks, Gabe. Prantik, would you like to tell us a little bit your experience and the lessons that you've been learning as you are currently deploying LDES projects?
Yeah, Gabe's answer was fantastic. So that's I'll answer from the TRL perspective then, because I think Gabe covered from the deployment, permitting, and all those issues, right? So from the TRL level, obviously, pump storage hydro has been there for a long time. But as Gabe mentioned, it's really, the construction time is long, and we don't have a favorable geology in most cases, and blah, 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 blah. But we do have a compressed air energy storage. I think it's coming up. And well, so the traditional compressed air storage systems, they used actually a natural gas fired turbine to compress the air to generate electricity. So it was not completely clean. And now we have developed using a thermal energy storage. So it's basically a combination of thermal storage and compressed air storage to come up with a fully clean plant. And its TRL level is low, a little bit lower, but we had the last recent pretty big scale deployment project and coming into commercialization recently. So I would say the mechanical energy storage systems are pretty mature, in my opinion. The gravitational storage systems are at pilot phase demonstration. So probably like, if you know the TRL scale developed by NASA, it's, I'd say like at most TRL 7 right now. In electrochemical systems, we have the technology, for example, vanadium flow battery is, it's commercially deployed right now. It's working. We have had a lot of pilot projects. We have had a lot of data, field data about its performance. It also integrates with renewable very well, quite good response time. Sodium sulfur battery, which is also, it has been deployed since I think 2011 or 2012, right? And we have a more than 100 megawatt plant in Middle East commercially running today. So they are at high TRL level. Now, the rest of the technologies, in my opinion, are actually probably at most TRL 8, close to. I'd say TRL 7 probably is more because we have like, pilot projects that are being developed. The thermal energy storage systems it's a little bit difficult to compare. We have had, for example, some concentrated solar power thermal storage plants have been running since I think 2010 or a little bit after that. So some of the thermal systems are pretty well developed and you can consider it to be like quite mature. Some of the systems like liquid air or maybe the cryo storage systems, they are probably the less developed. So I agree with Gabe in general that we are at like a tipping point where we are trying to see, we are basically there at a point that we can start deploying them. But different technologies, different LDES technologies are at different TRL, somewhere between 7 and 9, I'd say.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a question talking now that you mentioned, Pratik, different technologies that are out there. We have a question if there any comments on LDES for energy storage for grid purposes, particularly in northern climates, such as sand batteries being converted to electrical energy or hydrogen storage. Do you have any comment on that, or maybe I would go to I think that each technology adapts differently from one purpose to another, but anything particular about northern climates? I think that's where the question is going.
Gabe, would you like to take that first? Or?
Sure. And I think this gets to some of my earlier comments. Why do we need long duration energy storage resources to begin with? Well, if you're thinking about decarbonizing or you're in a grid and you want to decarbonize, the idea is that you should be focused on your geography. So you're going to need to do explicit studies to map out what your resource profile should look like in a least cost portfolio for development to ultimately decarbonize or whatever your goal is for decarbonization. And that should be a roadmap or a glide path where you have prescribed targets by prescribed dates. And that's going to get you a mix of probably most of your energy is going to be coming from wind resources and solar resources. And it's going to also prescribe a certain mix of storage resources. So again, 4-hour duration resources, maybe 10+ hour duration resources, maybe 100+ hour duration resources. And there is no uniform answer for all geographies. And I think the geography question is exactly getting at the heart of the problem. The solution, that optimal least cost portfolio to decarbonize is going to be much different in California, where solar is abundant, than in New York, which has some interesting challenges based on congestion and lines, versus someplace in the Midwest or maybe in the northern part of the US, where maybe wind is really abundant. And your optimal portfolio of resources is going to be dependent on what kind of renewable energy is abundant in your area, when that energy is going to be online and providing services to your grid. And then that is going to should be dictating how much and what kind of resources you're going to need to decarbonize. And the answers to those questions have got to come from a robust modeling exercise where ideally you're not just focusing on your one state or your one region, you're looking broader to a larger geographical area. So you can borrow on, the diversity from like east and west when the sun comes up. You're borrowing on maybe some geographical regions where there is abundant renewable energy. Maybe you're tapping into neighbors that do have access to low-cost hydropower, something like that. So all of those things come into play. And for best practices on modeling, we do encourage members to use some of the latest very sophisticated tools in terms of modeling. We encourage open source modeling, so something that's going to be recreatable by anybody who looks at the study. We encourage visibility into the input assumptions that are associated with the modeling. And then obviously high visibility into the outputs and what that least cost bundle looks like. Again, so it can be reproduced, it can be challenged, it can be talked about in a sophisticated way. These old, some of the older models where it's more of a black box, where you've got some inputs where you're not really sure what the inputs are, and you're not really sure how that's driving outputs. That's not the way to do business going forward. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Certainly does. Prantik, would you like to add something?
Yeah, Christina, could you repeat the question first? I couldn't understand it properly.
Sure. 1 second. So, are there any comments on LDES for energy storage for grid purposes, particularly in northern climates, such as sand batteries being converted to electrical energy or hydrogen storage? I think this more relates to what Gabe was mentioning. It depends a lot on the geographical area.
You said northern areas?
Northern climates.
Like north of US or somewhere else?
I don't know if the participant Jagannathan can answer, but in the meantime,
yeah. So I can. So assuming that it's like, well, let me give the answer for like northern part of America and say versus northern part of Europe, and if it helps. So first, I totally agree with Gabe that it first comes from like what energy resources you need comes from a complete resource planning. Totally agree with that. There are many cases where we have 24/7, renewable power generation technologies available. Like, for example, there are a lot of areas which have a lot of geothermal potential. There are a lot of areas which have a lot of hydro potential. They're 24/7. So in those areas, to decarbonize, you probably don't need any energy storage at all. Maybe some peaking plants, peaker plants or something, but not long duration. Provided that you need some kind of long duration energy storage as a result of your resource planning for the area. In the northern area, so I'm guessing that, I know that in northern part of Europe, in many areas, like tidal energy is a huge resource, right? Geothermal energy is a huge resource. So they probably are not looking at LDES to a large extent. If they're looking at LDES technologies, one primary concern is temperature, right? And it affects the round trip efficiency, the energy capacity, as well as degradation a lot. Typically, what we have seen is that for electrochemical technologies, the round trip efficiency and the energy capacity and all these things are lower at lower temperatures. So, for example, think about flow batteries. It has a liquid in it, and liquid has to flow. So, if the ambient temperature is really, really low, then the flow of the liquid will be affected, and obviously the energy conversion process will get affected. So you get overall lower energy capacity and round trip efficiency. What we have seen typically from our project experience is that in low temperature climates, the companies somehow favor more. The companies favor the thermal energy technologies more, and a primary reason is that in many thermal technologies, you can go the upper part of the temperature, the upper range of the temperature can go up to like close to 1,000 degrees Celsius or even higher. So it doesn't really matter if you are at like a sub-freezing or freezing condition in the ambient area, because the higher end of the temperature is so high that temperature differential doesn't make much sense. Whereas, for example, where the average temperature lies between, say, 20 degrees Celsius to 50 degrees Celsius, we have seen companies choose electrochemical technologies because in that temperature range, it's easy for your thermal management system to maintain the temperature. So from our project experience, this came out to be an important factor other than the geology itself, the ambient temperature, and choosing the technology based on that ambient temperature case. Hope it helps the answer, and because I wasn't sure if this was a question.
Thanks for that answer. Sure. Moving on to the next question, which I think is really important to get more of these projects getting started. How can stakeholders, governments, industry, academia, etc., collaborate to overcome the challenges that we're finding in deploying these LDS projects? What are the ideas? I know that the Long Duration Energy Storage Council is doing a lot with all your different members. So how can we start bringing them together? What are your takes on that? Gabe, would you like to start?
So yeah, you may have some other ideas about some of the challenges that you're thinking of, but I think typically we think about challenges as just deployment in general. Why aren't we seeing more deployment? How do we get more deployment? Those kind of questions. And I think stepping back and thinking about why we care about deployment is important. Obviously, there's benefits like we talked about. More deployment means maturing some of the companies that are providing the technologies, moving them up in terms of TRL. It means bringing costs down for long duration energy storage technologies, which is then going to drive more development. And obviously, the end goal should be decarbonization. So we're operating grids. We're living in a world where we're just emitting less carbon, which means less impact on climate change, which is presumably a good thing. So I think thinking about that particular challenge, the long and short, or maybe the unfortunate answer is that today, with existing market structures, energy markets, resource adequacy markets, ancillary service markets, where traditional resources earn most of their revenues, it's certainly not, profit maximizing or profitable to be developing long duration energy storage resources and having them participate in grids and earn those kind of revenues. So I think, then you can kind of think about a question of, gee, how do we change markets to sort of incentivize or pay long duration energy storage resources if we as a society know that they're going to be good and helpful for decarbonization? Or you've got the question of, maybe we just back up and say, if we know we want to decarbonize grids and we know we need to do this by a certain date, maybe the question is just how do we pay for these resources, which is an even simpler question. So I think if the question is the latter, how do we pay for these resources? Then you can start to, traditional ways that you pay for resources are a utility could build the resource. The costs for that resource build out could then be incorporated into effectively the rate base. So customers of that utility have to pay for the resource over a period of time. But then you might also have this conversation of, long duration energy storage resources, as we just talked about, tend to be more expensive than lithium ion resources. If you're talking like in terms of actual dollars spent, if you're talking about 8-hour solutions, 10-hour solutions relative to existing, maybe a 2 or a 4-hour solution that's being developed today, they also tend to be more expensive than traditional, say, natural gas fired, low cost natural gas fired generation. So maybe there needs to be some sort of a program where governments incentivize build out of this. One of the things that we found is that's most effective and that's driving, frankly, most of the build out of anticipated future long duration energy storage are simply mandates. You're a region, California, you've got a procurement target that says, hey, by 2028, we need to have at least 1,000 megawatts of 8-hour plus duration storage on our system. We know that this is going to be essential in our path for decarbonization, so that's why we're setting the target. Frankly, I think a lot of countries that already have deep levels of decarbonization, so we're thinking about places like Australia, some of the places in the EU today, very high levels of renewable generation. They're already coming to this realization that, hey, if we don't have something to capture this excess generation at the times that we have it and store it for the times that we need it, which is generally longer than a 4-hour duration period, we're going to be running our system at a lower efficiency than we could be. So the drivers there are more born out of what the system is actually doing today, rather than something that's driving specific targets. But those targets will get storage resources built and bring those capital costs, the overall cost to build these resources down, and that's going to build further future economic cases to build out these resources.
Thanks, Gabe. Prantik, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, just a little bit. So the question was about how academia, industry, and government organizations can work together, right?
Yeah, different stakeholders.
Right, different stakeholders. Yeah. So, well, for example, I come from academic research background. I've worked on the electrochemical technology development. Now I'm working in deploying those, having projects deploying those technologies, right? So, traditionally in academia and in national labs, the resource models that we're talking about, they were actually developed either in academia or in national labs. There are some exceptions, but in most cases they're developed by academia and national labs. Also, for example, the major R&D developments usually come from academia, right? For example, one major R&D development is, for example, if you think about lithium-ion industry, there has been different materials that came out recently that changed the energy density, increase the energy density, increase the cycle life of the batteries. They are usually driven by academia. So, and obviously there are technology manufacturers. They are manufacturing technologies. And if you notice one important thing, that most of the LDES technology providers, say in the electrochemical or in thermal storage space, they are actually startups, and many of their founders actually come from academia, because they worked on that. They or their friends worked on those technologies in the lab, and they are now scaling it up and selling it as a solution, as a product, right? So academia has a huge contribution. And so for example, Black & Veatch, we are an EPC company. We basically, design projects, conceptually design projects, provide strategic guidance, and then go up to the construction, so the whole thing. So we are basically deploying those projects, and that's how I think we are spearheading the LDES game. Obviously, government agencies are providing, policies and funding, tax benefits for projects, funding for projects, and as well as funding to scale up the manufacturing as well, right? And last but not the least, so for example, an organization like RedMed, now it's creating that platform where we are discussing all these issues. We're going to be at the conference too, talking about all these issues. So it's more like, information sharing, getting to learn from each other and all these things. So as you see, everyone is doing playing different kinds of roles, and that's why we should all be working together.
Yeah, great answers. Well, thank you so much. I think we have time for a couple more questions. If we have more questions from the audience, but if not, don't worry, because we always send our questions to our panelists. And if not, you can always come to the event and ask them in person, which is a really good option. So kind of to wrap up and sum up the idea, where do you see LDS technologies in the next 15 years? Because now we're kind of seeing it getting started. How do you see it's gonna, if that domino effect, Gabe, that you were mentioning before, how do you see it happening, or where do you see it at, kind of with your crystal ball? Gabe, would you like to start?
Yeah, if I had a crystal ball, maybe I'd play the lottery and retire or something. No, I do think your plug for the in-person event is really good and really important. I will certainly be there, and I would be happy to talk in person with anybody who has questions about long duration energy storage, or with anybody who has interest in joining the Long Duration Energy Storage Council. Where we're talking about these questions every day. There's a lot of people in the organization who are thinking about how to advance this. I think the question's a good one, and if we are looking at targets to decarbonize globally by 2040, long duration energy storage, and even if we get 70% of the way there, 80% of the way there, some portion of the way there, which I think would be incredible to think about where we were 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I do think, well, it's going to be critical that long duration energy storage is a part of the solution, even if we're talking about partial decarbonization. As I've mentioned, there are already electricity infrastructure, countries, states, regions that need long duration energy storage. They flag the need for it, and they know they need it in absence of new thermal generation. So this is already a problem in some areas. We know for sure, and this is a given, that renewables are going to grow by leaps and bounds in the next few years. As that growth happens, the argument for long duration energy storage and the economics behind long duration energy storage only gets stronger. So this is going to become or shift from a problem where, gee, we can kind of get ahead of the curve and start to plan ahead today, or we absolutely have to have this stuff now, or we're going to be leaving a lot of money on the table in terms of like curtailed resources or potentially very high amounts of carbon emissions to offset what we could have had via clean electricity generation. So, like I said, I think we're getting close to that top point of the roller coaster where we start to head down. The traction is going to pick up certainly in the next 15 years. And 15 years from now, if we are having some of these same conversations, it's going to be more of a success story about how fast things grew and how fast things changed. And the sheer quantity, the volumes and the amount of installed capacity is going to be very large in 15 years for LDES.
Thanks, Gabe. Prantik?
Yeah, so Gabe answered from the deployment and resource, that perspective. So being the technology person a lot, thinking about technologies quite a lot. So let me share my perspective from the technology perspective. Many times, so I agree with Gabe that we'll have a lot of deployment because it's required, right? Now, what technologies will prevail and what technologies won't prevail? I think this is one question that the investors ask us a lot, the project developers ask us a lot. My answer is that it's really hard to say. I think most of the technologies have some use cases, and in terms of one technology maybe the best in one particular geology, one particular climate, for one particular utility or something, and this technology may not be the best for other geology, other climate, or other utilities. So we will have a mix of different LDES technologies that will prevail. What we need to do, and this is, for example, what we are trying to develop as part of the LDES consortium led by Sandia National Lab, is that trying to come up with a set of metrics like round trip efficiency and all those things, where we can try to compare like technologies that are different, say electrochemical versus thermal, in an apple-to-apple way, so that at least the utilities or the independent power producers they can make a decision based on their own criteria, so that they have the data and they can have their own criteria. So that's one thing that I think that needs to be done, because we have so many different kinds of technologies. The second thing is that we need to, and this is something very important, I think we need a collaboration between the startups that are providing these new technologies with, say, national labs or organizations like EPRI, to come up with like very robust testing data so that we know like the degradation parameters in various use conditions. Like as Gabe was mentioning, you may not cycle a technology every day, like 8 hours or 10 hours, right? You may cycle it up to 60% and then stop. So we need to know the degradation parameters or the round trip efficiency and all these things at different operational conditions that the startups by themselves, like technology providers by themselves, they cannot do. So what I'm trying to say is that making the technology, the products or the solutions more and more bankable by more and more testing that are done by some organizations that are renowned, and also based on some metrics that we can all agree. And then we'll have, I think, more faith in the LDS technologies. The investors will invest more, and I think the utilities will try to deploy more.
Okay, well, thank you so much. It is a long road ahead, but I think it's gonna get easier and easier. So first of all, thank you so much, Gabe and Prantik, for this session. Thank you for all the reports mentioned, all the data and information in your vision. We hope to see everyone very, very soon, and hope you all have a wonderful day. So thank you so much. Goodbye.